But the damage that he did was just really incredible.
Yeah.
He slashed 250,000 federal employees, more than 8,500 contracts, more than 10,000 grants, and his cutbacks on medical research cost the lives of the foreign aid, cost 300,000 lives, mostly children. That's the damage that Elon Musk did. So I don't think anyone should be listening to him about anything.
On the June 4th, 2025 episode of The View, co-host Sunny Hostin made a striking claim that Elon Musk's tenure as head of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, led to the deaths of approximately 300,000 people, predominantly children, due to significant cuts in foreign aid and medical research programs. Hostin highlighted that Musk's cost-cutting measures included the elimination of 250,000 federal jobs, over 8,500 contracts, and more than 10,000 grants. She emphasized that the abrupt reduction in foreign aid and medical research funding had catastrophic consequences, particularly in vulnerable regions reliant on U.S. assistance. Bono also took a shot on this on his recent podcast with Joe Rogan. Have a look.
We've got plenty to discuss today. Let's start with Bono. He's had some thoughts about USAID.
It's not proven, but the surveillance enough suggests 300,000 people have already died from just this cut off, this hard cut of USAID.
Supporting Hostin's assertion, a study by Brooke Nichols, a mathematician and infectious disease expert at Boston University, estimated that the DOGE-led cuts to USAID funding resulted in approximately 300,000 global deaths, with over 200,000 being children. The cuts, which slashed over 80% of USAID's $42 billion budget in 2023, primarily affected programs combating HIV/AIDS, malaria, malnutrition, and providing clean water and food aid. The claim has sparked significant controversy. Critics argue that attributing such a high number of deaths directly to Musk's actions is speculative and lacks concrete evidence. They point out that while the cuts undoubtedly had adverse effects, the exact number of resultant deaths is difficult to quantify. Elon Musk has dismissed the allegations, labeling them as unfounded and politically motivated. He has defended the cuts as necessary measures to eliminate what he described as inefficiencies and corruption within USAID. Musk emphasized that essential humanitarian aid programs were preserved, and that the restructuring aimed to enhance the effectiveness of U.S. foreign assistance. The debate underscores the complexities of foreign aid policy and the challenges in balancing fiscal responsibility with humanitarian obligations. As discussions continue, the long-term impacts of the DOGE-led cuts remain a contentious topic among policymakers, experts, and the public. Musk even retweeted about bills saying, "I don't understand the logic of not pushing back on this new bill. What would be downsides when the cost of letting it pass is so right?"
I'm looking. I was two tables away from Trump, and I'm looking. I'm like, man, this is too much, you know.
The moment Sunny Hostin made her explosive accusation, the entire studio went silent. Her voice didn't tremble, it thundered. She looked directly into the camera and declared that Elon Musk's budget-slashing spree had led to the deaths of 300,000 people, many of them children. It wasn't just a number, it was a direct charge.
It's about man's inhumanity to man.
The tragedy was the injustice, in my opinion.
Which part? Which injustice?
The criminal trial. The fact that he was not found guilty.
Oh.
Yeah.
I
But
see.
he was found liable later,
Yes.
civilly.
Like Trump is found liable.
Yes, he was.
It's the same thing.
Everything goes back to Trump.
A moral indictment on live television. Hostin explained that during Musk's leadership of the Department of Government Efficiency, essential humanitarian programs were gutted. Life-saving grants disappeared overnight. Medical research for infectious diseases halted. Clean water and food aid initiatives were abandoned midstream. According to her, these weren't policy shifts. They were deadly decisions. What followed was a firestorm. According to data cited by Hostin, over 80% of USAID's $42 billion budget was cut. That meant slashing resources to fight HIV, malaria, and childhood malnutrition across the globe. One researcher estimated that over 200,000 of the dead were children, many under the age of 5. Entire villages were reportedly left without vaccines or clean drinking water. Musk's supporters pushed back hard. They called Hostin's comments outrageous, accusing her of playing politics with tragedy.
We've criticized her in different contexts before, and she just maybe smart is not the right word. She is not knowledgeable about the things that she argues about.
But Sunny didn't back down. She held up the numbers, she quoted experts, and she repeated her point. Real people had died, and someone had to take responsibility. Backstage, producers scrambled. The network braced for fallout. Meanwhile, the internet caught fire. Social media was flooded with hashtags, opinion threads, and emotional video clips of Sunny's statement. Some viewers hailed her as a truth teller. Others said she had gone too far, but no one could ignore her. The next day, Musk responded publicly. He called the allegations baseless and said the reforms were aimed at rooting out inefficiency and fraud. He insisted that vital programs were protected and that the cuts were necessary to rebuild a bloated agency. His tone was calm but defiant, yet critics pointed to newly leaked memos suggesting that internal warnings about the humanitarian fallout had been ignored. Former USAID officials reportedly begged Doge to reconsider before pulling funding from key African and South American regions.
Stay away from the stairways. Because, people put their leg out to trip you going down the stairs.
Their pleas were met with silence. Political leaders began weighing in. Some praised Musk for trimming waste. Others slammed him for treating human life like a balance sheet. Sunny Hostin's words had done more than spark a debate. They had reopened a moral wound on a national stage. As the week went on, more stories emerged. Reports of abandoned clinics, empty food storage warehouses, and halted vaccine shipments painted a grim picture. Aid workers told heartbreaking stories of watching children die from treatable illnesses simply because funding ran out. And amid all of it, Sunny stood by her claim. She said this wasn't about politics. It was about truth. She wasn't accusing Musk of murder, she clarified, but of indifference. And in her words, indifference can kill just as surely as violence. The backlash didn't scare her. It fueled her. Sunny Hostin doubled down the following day, returning to The View with binders full of sourced reports, government documents, and heartbreaking testimonials from doctors on the ground. Her voice cracked only once, when she read a letter from a Ugandan nurse who wrote, "They stopped our funding. We stopped saving lives." The studio audience, once unsure, now leaned in with stunned attention. Even co-hosts who typically kept the peace sat silently, listening as Hostin painted a picture that was no longer political. It was deeply human. These weren't just statistics, she said. These were children with names, parents with dreams, families left shattered because of a decision made in a DC boardroom. Across the country, opinion was split in two. Cable news picked sides. Some anchors praised Hostin as a modern Cassandra, warning of disaster before the nation was ready to hear it. Others accused her of fear-mongering, of laying death at the feet of a man who had simply followed a mandate to clean up government waste.
The president already knows where Elon Musk stood on this bill. It doesn't change the president's opinion. This is one big, beautiful bill, and he's sticking to it.
But behind the outrage was one undeniable truth. People were starting to ask questions. Why were programs with decades of impact suddenly defunded? Who had signed off on the spreadsheet that sealed the fate of hundreds of thousands? And why had no one been held accountable until now? Musk's camp launched a full-scale PR blitz. They showcased internal reviews that claimed fraud and misuse had plagued USAID for years. They presented reports of inflated expenses, duplicate programs, and politically motivated grants. One spokesman called it the swampiest corner of Washington, yet every time they tried to shift the narrative, another story emerged. Another village without antibiotics, another family whose child died from preventable disease, another aid worker forced to turn people away. The numbers might have been debated, but the pain behind them was not. Congressional committees began holding emergency hearings. Hostin was asked to testify, and she agreed without hesitation. When she appeared before the committee, she didn't hold back.
But the damage that he did was just really incredible. He slashed 250,000 federal employees, more than 8,500 contracts, more than 10,000 grants, and his cutbacks on medical research cost the lives of the foreign aid, cost 300,000 lives, mostly children. That's the damage that Elon Musk did. So I don't think anyone should be listening to him about anything.
"I'm not an economist," she said. "I'm not a bureaucrat, but I am a mother, and I know when something is morally wrong." Her testimony went viral. viral. Millions watched the clip online. Her voice quivered, but her words landed like thunder. She stared directly at the lawmakers and asked, "What is the price of a child's life? Is it really worth a budget cut?" Meanwhile, whistleblowers from inside DOGE came forward. One claimed he had been instructed to cut first, justify later. Another revealed that entire departments had been shut down with no transition plan, leaving international partners scrambling. A third said Musk rarely read the humanitarian impact briefs, brushing them off as emotional distractions. The pressure was mounting. Activist groups called for an independent investigation. Protesters gathered outside government buildings with signs that read, "Budget cuts, blood cost." Families who lost loved ones began organizing online, demanding a reckoning, and through it all, Hostin remained front and center. Not because she wanted fame, but because she felt a responsibility. "This isn't about me," she told a crowd of reporters. "It's about the people who never got a chance to speak." The storm reached its peak when a damning internal memo leaked to the press, signed by a top Doge official and dated months before the aid cuts were enacted. The memo warned that slashing USAID funds without transition plans would result in catastrophic loss of life, particularly among children reliant on food, water, and medical aid.
I have a question. Do stupid people get to a point in life where they realize that they're, stupid? Because this is what panic sounds like in legacy media.
This one really mattered. And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you.
The language was cold. The consequences were clear. The memo had been forwarded to Musk. Public outrage exploded. No longer was this just a television debate or a partisan feud. This was a national reckoning. News anchors began using a word they had previously tiptoed around: negligence. Elon Musk finally addressed the memo directly during a hastily arranged press conference. His demeanor was tight. His words were calculated. "We were trying to fix a broken system," he said. "We never intended to hurt anyone." But the damage was done. The air had shifted. Even some of his staunchest defenders began to pull back. Then came the hearings. Sonny Hostin returned to Capitol Hill, this time not just as a witness, but as a symbol. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle grilled Doge officials. Victims' families testified. Aid workers recounted the chaos. It wasn't just heartbreaking, it was undeniable. Under pressure from multiple investigations, the Justice Department opened a formal inquiry into whether federal law had been violated in the execution of the budget cuts. Subpoenas were issued. Resignations followed. The Doge was temporarily suspended pending oversight reform. And through it all, Sonny Hostin kept speaking. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply stood firm. "I said the truth, and the truth did the rest," she told reporters. Her courage had shifted the national conversation from political bickering to moral accountability.
Today, the Trump administration dismissed nearly $60 billion in foreign aid grants and contracts.
Months later, Congress passed the Global Humanitarian Safeguard Act, a bipartisan law requiring independent humanitarian reviews before any foreign aid cuts can be implemented. It was nicknamed Sonny's Law. In a closing segment of The View, surrounded by a silent audience, Sonny read the names of 10 children who had died after losing access to medical aid. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. The studio was filled with tears, not just from viewers, but from the co-hosts themselves. And then she looked into the camera one last time. "I can't bring them back," she said, voice steady, "but I can make sure their lives meant something." The screen faded to black, not with music, not with applause, but with a single line of white text. Never again. That was how it ended, not with vengeance, but with purpose.
Nature with respect to the rest of the world. Sonny Hostin goes on The View and decides now would be a great time to dump all over the so-called uneducated.
What we did not have is white women who voted about 52%, right, for Donald Trump. Uneducated white women, is my understanding. You have Latino men, actually, voting more for him. And you have, and black men was not the story. We're not the story here because they voted almost 80% for the vice.
Weeks after the hearings, the country was still processing what had happened. It wasn't just about Sonny Hostin or Elon Musk anymore. It had become something bigger. A moral rupture had been exposed, and it could no longer be ignored. News cycles slowed, but the impact didn't fade. Parents and in remote villages remembered the aid that never came. Doctors remembered the patients they couldn't save. And lawmakers remembered the shame of having looked the other way. Then, quietly, without fanfare, Sunny Hostin stepped away from the view. There was no grand announcement, no farewell party. She simply left her chair empty one morning. She had said everything she needed to say. Her message had already traveled farther than any segment could reach. Instead of a goodbye speech, she released a short handwritten note posted to her social media. Justice is not just punishment, it's remembrance. I did what I could, now it's your turn. That post became the most shared political message of the year. In the months that followed, Sunny didn't return to TV. She visited the countries impacted by the cuts. She met the families. She held the hands of mothers who had buried their children. She walked through the clinics that had once stood silent and now, with emergency aid restored, were slowly being rebuilt. At one school in Sierra Leone, children lined up with signs that read, "Thank you, Sunny." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just stood there, tears running silently down her face. Meanwhile, Elon Musk resigned from his government post, citing philosophical differences with the oversight committees. He returned to his private ventures, but the shine around his public image had dulled. His name was now etched into a complex legacy, one of innovation and unimaginable cost. Back home, Congress pushed forward with broader humanitarian protections. Sunny's law was expanded into what would become the largest global aid accountability package in U.S. history. Every future aid cut would require a moral audit. Every decision would be traceable, transparent, human. In a rare moment of unity, both political parties agreed on one truth: indifference had nearly killed more than a virus ever could. 1 year to the day after her now legendary broadcast, The View aired a special tribute. The studio was silent again, just as it had been before, but this time, the silence wasn't fear, it was respect. The screen faded in slowly, showing a single image: Sunny Hostin walking alone through a sunlit field in Africa, surrounded by children laughing again, playing again, alive again. And then came the final words, written in soft gold across the screen. She spoke. The world listened, and because of that, they lived. That was the perfect ending, because it wasn't just about who was right, it was about who refused to stay silent.